All right, guys, I am so looking forward to this. Today, we are talking with Dr. Donny Jackson. Now, Dr. Donny is an incredibly interesting person and someone who truly defies a simple title or label. Now, here's what I'm talking about. He is a doctor of clinical psychology and a practiced as a clinical psychologist for over a decade. And then he packed up and pursued a dream and moved to LA with no connections. Get that, right? But his passion for story and his fascination with the human journey led him to his current career as both an Emmy-award winning producer and director, as well as a poet. Now, as a producer, he's worked on some unscripted television that you've probably heard of. Shows like CNN's United Shades of America or TV One's R&B Divas. Got to check that out. The ABC's The Bachelor. I'm guessing you've definitely heard that. And his current project is this beautiful show that you've got to check out. He's in season 2, and it's Apple TV's series simply called Dear. This thing is absolutely gorgeous, and it's people that you know about, and they're getting to hear from people that they've impacted. It's beautiful. And you guys are going to want to check that out. Now, here's the thing. He also is a poet. All right. And Donny has been a staple of the poetry and spoken word communities for over 2 decades. And his newest poetry collection called Boy was recently published and is available wherever books are sold. It's absolutely a beautiful collection. You need to check that out too. I got to tell you, I've been so looking forward to this conversation. So let's get to it. Dr. Donny Jackson, welcome to Dream Think Do.
Mitch, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so I've got about 1,000 questions, so I'm glad this episode is going to be 4 hours long. But one of my first questions, like I always love to do my research, and you know, as I was telling you before we hit record, everything I turned up, I'm like, man, I'm just fascinated with this guy. But like I mentioned in my intro, you kind of defy labels and titles. So when you meet someone, how do you describe what you do?
Wow, it's a great question. It depends on what their question is.
Sure.
You know, the staple question is, you know, what do you do?
Yeah.
You know, it's one of my least favorite questions because it's not about the person. I'd rather somebody ask me, how was your day, or what do you think about, you know, this particular headline. But you know, I know what people mean when they ask. And so I tell them what I do for a living, you know, to keep the lights on and keep myself, you know, excited about working. And, you know, I'll mention probably, you know, parenthetically that I also am a writer.
Yeah.
You know, the doctor part is kind of a deep file, you know, that doesn't always come up.
That's right. Yeah. It's just, I'm sure it's a curiosity, but I'm sure people are like, well, what is that part? Yeah. Which let's talk about that because like I mentioned in the intro, you are a trained clinical psychologist. You got your doctorate, the whole thing. You practiced for a decade in Pennsylvania, if I'm understanding that correctly. But then you gave yourself permission to do something else entirely, not just, you know, change careers, but change geography, change everything. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that season for you of making that decision, because a lot of dream think doers are thinking they're either working on big stuff or working towards big stuff. And what you gave yourself permission to do was huge. So let's talk about that a little bit. How did you give yourself that permission to make that kind of change?
First of all, I love the description of giving myself permission. I think that's a great way of talking about it, because that's how it felt at the time. You know, I was a professor at a university, I had a private practice, I was running a mental health center. And but I was also writing all the time, you know, staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, writing poems, trying my hand at screenwriting. And, you know, it was, and I've been writing since I was a kid. You know, I've been passionate about it since I was a kid. But at some point, I felt frustrated that, well, why aren't you doing this for a living? If you're staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning, it must mean something. And, you know, I was well trained as a psychologist, and I think, you know, I did some good work. But it was very clear to me at that point that it wasn't my life's passion. My life's passion is as a storyteller, whether it be poems or you know, short stories or screenwriting. And so I thought, look, you know, being a doctor is a great safety net, I
Exactly.
could,
Good backup plan.
yeah, I could always come back to it. So I thought, well, let's just take the leap. I didn't
Wow.
have, a wife or a mortgage or even
Yeah.
a cat. I had,
Right.
and I brought my plant with me. So, uh, all of my dependents, fit in my car basically.
Exactly.
So I didn't renew my contract at the university. I packed up my little Nissan Sentra full of books and CDs,
Wow.
and
Wow.
took off to LA. And as you mentioned, I didn't have any connections, didn't have a job,
Yeah.
and I just had the dream. Literally, I had the dream. Look, this is something I want to try to do, and I'm fond of telling people it is the single best decision I've ever made in my life to this
Wow.
day. To
Wow.
just as you say, give myself permission. And at the time, what I was uh, fond of describing it as is betting on myself.
Yeah.
That is, you'll figure it out or you won't. But my odds are, and I think the odds are in your favor.
Yeah, like I believe in me. I'm going to do this
Yeah,
thing, right? And it may not
yeah.
be pretty, it may be a whole lot of work, but I'm going to do this thing. Well,
Yeah,
and
so
I think that that's
I'm super
yeah.
stubborn. So it's like, no, like I'll break the code, and if
Yeah.
I don't, okay, it won't be for lack of trying.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I think, we could talk about sunk cost fallacy. There's a whole lot of people that feel like, okay, I put all this money into an education, or I put 10 years into a profession. Therefore, I got to stick with that the rest of my life. You kind of allowed yourself to say, all right, these were a great set of experiences. I've learned a lot, but I'm moving on. I'm going to do this other thing I've been passionate about. And I love that you were also looking at the clues like, hey, I'm staying up till 2 a.m. where nobody's paying me to do this, but I'm still staying up to 1, 2 a.m. to do this. Like those are clues that are important, right? Now, I do want to ask though, because it would be easy to say, oh, you went to LA, and I think it'd probably be easy for people to assume that within weeks you were working on The Bachelor or on Dear, but I know that wasn't the case. So I always love to break it down just a little bit and say, what was one of the things? Because my son is an actor. He, in non-COVID times, lives in LA, all this kind of stuff. LA is a big city. There's a lot of moving parts to your industry. What was one of the things? Because I think so many people, when they look at that big dream and say, okay, in this case, I'm going to move to LA. I'm going to break into the industry. I'm going to tell stories, all of that. It's so big. That first step is overwhelming. How did you figure out your first step, and what was kind of your first step to break that big goal down into something that you could actually take action
Yeah, uh, I don't want to make it sound like I was smart in terms of uh,
on? I love your
I I
humility.
I I figured out that button and I pushed it. No,
Yeah.
what I had in my favor was stubbornness and a certain amount of hubris. In terms of,
Yep.
no, I think I can compete. With the big guys. I think I'm talented. And that part of it I
Yeah.
felt was important to hold on to. And I think, if I have advice for people, it's to be in touch with that,
Yeah.
and to, not overinflate yourself, but also don't diminish what you think you have as a skill set,
Yep.
or as a drive, or as an ethic, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Embrace it. Nobody has to hear it necessarily out loud. I mean, it can
Right.
just kind of be your mantra as you
Yep.
get through things. I don't think it's a bad thing for people to know what you're passionate about, because
Yep.
sometimes they can kind of help you.
Yep.
And in my case, being comfortable talking about what I really wanted to do, even though I was doing something else, was the break for me.
Huh.
Again, it wasn't because I was so smart and I figured it out.
Right.
It's because I ended up taking another job. Again, I didn't have a job, and I
Yeah.
was, I had saved some money. One of the jobs that I did when I got out here is I worked on Zuma Beach in Malibu, and I was renting cabanas to people for 15 bucks a day. My buddy, the one guy that I knew when I moved out here, he had this business on the beach that had never been done before, and so I would rent cabanas to people for 15 bucks a day, and that's how I kept the lights on for a while. And his wife is a physician, and so at some point she became aware of a job for a psychologist, at this social services agency in Compton, and they needed somebody, and I was overqualified, but they really needed somebody. So they said, okay, cool, we'll pay you 3 days. We'll pay you for a full week of work, but you only have to work 3 days. And so that extra 2 days gave me a chance to continue writing and so on and so
Wow.
forth. But the
Wow.
lucky part, here's the lucky part though. Again, I didn't figure out what button to push.
Yeah.
I just kind of kept propelling through it. I met another psychologist there, a young woman named Dr. Laura Kokoyan, and
Wow.
we became friends. And at some point, she left, and months later, but I had talked to her about what my real dream was. In terms of, this is how I got out here, and this is what I'm doing to keep the
Yeah.
lights on because I'm trained to do it. And months later, she called me up and she said, "Guess what? I'm actually working on The Real World for MTV in the casting department. But I know of this job that's open in the story department." And I didn't know what
Oh,
that was. I
right.
had no idea
Yeah.
what that meant. I had watched The Real World for years. I mean, it had been on for 8 seasons at that
For
point.
sure. Yeah.
Um, but a story editor is a person who looks at all this footage and then tries to,
Piece together a
assemble
story.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, cool, I can do that. I didn't know if I could do that, but
Right. The answer is yes.
sure. But she got me an interview.
Ah,
She got me an interview with probably the smartest person I've ever met, a woman named Joyce Corrington, who happened to also have a doctorate, but her doctorate was in engineering. And she had
unbelievable.
this amazing life. She had written for soap operas. She had written books with her husband, novels, mystery novels with her husband. And so she and I bonded over
Ah,
the unicorn of it.
yep.
Her,
Right.
she's like, "You're weird too," you know.
Weird
uh,
attracts weird, right? Like
yeah,
we got to band
yeah.
together. Oh
And
my gosh.
I was older than people start these kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
All my peers were, in their mid-20s, and I so wasn't.
Yes. Right.
But but Joyce and I bonded over that, and the fact that I was passionate about storytelling and could write prose really well. And
Wow.
so, once we assembled the story, then we would write it up as a kind of a prose story and give that to the executive producers. And that's how I got the job, because I could write prose really well.
Wow.
I wouldn't get that job today because they don't do that anymore. Now they just assemble everything. They just,
Yeah.
clip, and hand that set of clips to the editor, and the editor, has at it. And so I was lucky because I spoke my dream out loud to somebody who
Right.
remembered it and connected me to somebody who could, water and give it sunshine.
Uh,
And
there's
and
so
and
many
and so
elements.
my
Yeah.
so yeah, my first job was as a story editor for The Real World. and
That is
and
incredible.
Laura and I have continued to have weird lives in that way. She's gone on to be a showrunner and director as well, and we've
Wow.
stayed friends all this time. And I owe my career to her listening and remembering that
Right.
I had a dream too.
How great is that? Well, and there's so many elements to that. That's why I'm glad this episode is going to be 4 hours long. There's so many elements of that I want to dive into, because I think, one of the things I talk about, I've got a book called Dream Job Redefined. And I interviewed about 200 people that would be in self-described dream jobs. And I kind of I broke it down to say, all right, how did you get here? And one of the things that was there were what we called bridge jobs, which were not glamorous, but they were often jobs that helped you get somewhere, right? And the renting cabanas for $15, like you're a doctor of clinical psychology, right? But you knew you had to find a way to piece this together, and then to be a psychologist in Compton for 3 days a week, right? Not the glamorous, not the most like a direct trajectory to storytelling and show running and producing, but those were pieces, they were bridges to get you there. And I love that, but that you were also verbalizing and vocalizing that dream. And by knowing you, I'm also guessing that you were asking them about their dreams, their aspirations, right? Like you weren't just saying, hey, everybody, this is what I want to do. You were also saying, hey, who are you as a human being? So I can only imagine the connections, because they want to help people that they feel connected to. So, so good. I love that. I love that. And thank you for being real with us too, because that's incredible. And I think the last point, and I'll stop, but the last point that I love is that the thing you were doing back in Pennsylvania, staying up till 11, 12, 1, 2 in the morning, is the thing that actually helped you get on with the real world. Like working that muscle, you didn't start working that muscle when you got the opportunity. You've been working that muscle when nobody been looking for years.
That's right.
And that matters, right?
Yeah.
This is the non-glamorous, non-sexy part of dream pursuits. And it's such a great example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm a fan of the adage that luck is when opportunity meets preparation, you
Yep.
know, yes, I had been working on it for a while. And so when that opportunity came, those skills finally came in handy.
Exactly.
I didn't know when that was going to happen.
Yeah.
But I was ready when it happened in that regard. But it definitely, I still describe it as luck.
Sure.
But it's not mystical. I think
No.
whatever your cosmology is, I think it's fair to say, if you know, and another adage is the harder you work, the luckier you get,
Right.
because you're
For
putting
sure.
yourself in those positions where somebody can
That's
notice
exactly right.
what you want.
That's exactly
If
right.
it is not this, it's not the Cinderella story where you're just waiting for Prince Charming to say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I got the slipper."
You're
You know,
you're
where you
sitting at a
been?
bar and somebody walks up and says, "Hey, do you need a job?" You know, like,
Yeah,
no, it's not
yeah.
that. Exactly
And
right. And
I
those
don't.
things, I suppose, can happen for some people, but you're exactly right. You set yourself up for a lot more of those types of opportunities and breakthroughs the harder you work, especially, you know, in some cases when nobody's looking. So I
Yeah.
love it. Well, okay. So I love that. And I would love to just continue to dive into that, but I want to switch gears because one of the other things I wanted to tap into is you're a producer, a director, a showrunner, which is, I'm sure, very challenging and probably really fun at times and stressful at other times, all of that. And then you're a poet and writer, which, you know, is using some of the same parts of your brain, but at the same time, dramatically different parts of your brain. So I didn't want to have you on the show without tapping into the thinking part because, you know, the show's called Dream, Think, Do. We want to help people to dream bigger, think better, and do more of what they were put on the planet to do. And I think you're an example of that. So I want to tap into your brain for just a second, especially because of your background as a clinical psychologist. I'm like, oh, this guy's going to have insight as well. So I want to tap into how do you get into kind of that optimum mindset for a day of producing, directing, show running versus getting yourself into an optimum for sitting down and having an amazing writing session?
That's a great question, and they are different processes.
Yeah.
And because the topic sentences are different. I mean, when I'm on a show, it's not my idea; it's somebody
Right.
else's idea. You know, I'm the midwife, I'm the doula. You know, my job
That's
is
a
to.
great point. Yes.
Yeah, so my job is to help somebody else's offspring, you know, get born
Yeah.
in a healthy way, you know, with the least amount of pain possible. So that's a process. So I have to make sure that I'm being very sensitive and empathic, you know, to the
Yeah.
people who want this thing to happen. And so I try to be very clear. What do you want to happen? Because I only have this one show to think about. So I'm going to
Right.
be a pit bull about it, and you have 13 shows to think about. And so just tell me what you want and I will guard it, you know,
Yeah.
with my life, you know. And
Wow.
so that's what I do. So that's one process. The other process in terms of writing, there's a lot more freedom because I'm the
Sure.
parent. I'm the
Yeah.
parent. I'm the
Right.
parent and the midwife. I'm giving birth in a cabin somewhere, you know, by myself. Uh,
That's right.
uh,
That's right.
and so that's much more liberating,
Yeah.
and in some ways, you know, it can be more daunting. I have nobody to blame. I have nobody to lean on in that regard. It's like I wait for the ideas to come. You
Yeah.
know, I leave myself open to those ideas. I know they will come, and so part of it is I trust myself as infinite in
Yeah.
that regard. I don't believe in
Mm.
writer's block. I don't believe that I will
Ooh.
run out of things to say. If the way that I would run out of things to say is that I stop paying attention to the world. And I don't think I'll do that unless, you know, something catastrophic health wise happens. But
Right.
if I keep paying attention to the world, I will always have something to talk about, because that's I think of myself as a prism of those things. So
Sure.
as long as I let the light in,
Yeah.
something's gonna come out, you know.
That's a great
And
way to look at it.
it may not always be good. It may not always be something that other people want to reflect on, but I trust, and I do it every week. I post a brand new poem from scratch every single week of the year for years on social media. And
Wow.
so I'm committed to the boot camp of that,
Yeah.
to kind of, because no matter what I'm doing, whether I'm running a show or something else, that's a commitment that I make to myself to stay fit.
Right. Well, and I think that was one of my questions, is because and I love the differentiation that, with the show, it's somebody else's idea that you're caring for, and then with the writing, that is you, but at the same time, that, both are very creative processes. But on the writing side, I think a lot of people, the dream think doers, can relate to that, because a lot of people that are working on a dream, oftentimes it's not their job yet. It's something they have to kind of bolster themselves. Nobody's pointing a finger and saying, "Hey, when's this going to be done?" It's like they've got to come up with that. So that was one of my other questions: is how have you? What are some of those systems? And I know when it's a creative process, a lot of people are like, "Oh, wait, I don't want to be boxed in by anything." But I could tell, like, by seeing something like that, I'm like, this guy's actually set up a set of systems that push or encourage or continue to, allow you to hone your craft. So I wondered about that. What are some of those other things that you do to make sure that that content is still coming out, that you're open with the prism and letting it flow? What are a few of the other things that you do to keep that craft going?
It it starts with embracing the fact that I love doing this and I'm going to do it for the rest of my life, as long as I can. And so and it makes me happy to do it. I'm unhappy if I'm not writing.
Yeah.
And so I'm very protective of that kind of lifeblood. Um,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean just because I love doing it that I'm going to be good at it every time. And
Right.
so the weekly commitment to, you know, cranking out a brand new I don't, there's no rollover poems, there's no rollover ideas. I start from scratch at the beginning of the week, and
Wow.
by the end of the week, I haven't missed a week in years. And again, I can't say that all those poems are golden. That's not for me to say.
Right.
I like all of them in some way or another. I'm committed to them. I don't let the world see them unless I feel like this is worth seeing in some way or another.
Right.
But obviously, people are going to have different connections to things. If I'm
Absolutely.
writing about a particular headline, or if I'm writing about a personal event in my life, it's going to vary who connects to it, and who doesn't. But for me, it's the commitment to the joy of writing,
Yeah.
and then also the commitment to being good at the thing that I'm joyful about.
Right.
Um, and so excuse me, it's a dual vow, if you will.
Yeah.
And I'm not comfortable with only one part of that. I'm not
Sure.
comfortable with just being a mechanic and
Right.
just saying, okay, I got to crank out a poem. Let's
Yeah.
just write a haiku. We'll be done in 17 syllables, and there, I've met my
Yeah.
commitment for the week.
Check it off the
No,
list. I'm done. Yeah.
I want it to, I want it to be beautiful. I want it to
Yeah.
have resonance. The whole point for me is that art is an act of persuasion. And if I'm not trying to
Mm.
move the needle in some way in somebody's heart or their head, then I've failed in that attempt.
Yeah.
That's the goal, to persuade. Whether you're a dancer, a singer, or a novelist, it doesn't
Right.
really matter. Your goal is to move somebody from where they were
Yeah.
to a new place, even if it's a familiar subject. Like romantic comedies are romantic comedies. We kind of know how that's supposed to play out,
Right.
but we keep watching them because there's so many entry points and there's so
Yeah.
many variations. And so the same thing, there's like 12 subjects, Mitch, you know what I mean? Uh,
Exactly right.
and so
Exactly.
me writing a love poem isn't reinventing the love poem, but it is,
Yeah.
in the sense
Exactly.
that
It's
I'm
both and.
showing
Yeah.
you my vantage point
Yeah.
here, my particular perspective, my prejudice, my bias, and
Right.
maybe that will speak to you in a way that something that Shakespeare didn't, or something that Rumi didn't. And
Right.
so then it justifies itself. If this gives you a new experience, then I'm cool. Then that I move the needle a little bit.
Right.
Um, and
That's
so even if it's something that somebody, yes, we all yes, love is a good thing. So yeah, we can stop writing love poems, right? Well, no, we want to,
Yeah, we're all full up
we,
on love. Don't need any more, Donnie.
yeah,
Yeah.
we get it. Yeah. Love is good. War is bad. And
Right.
sometimes we get scared. You know what I mean? There's 12 things.
Exactly. Exactly.
But there's so many ways. There's 7 billion of us. And
Yeah.
so, and each of us has a certain amount of days. So
Yep.
if you do the permutations and combinations, there's so much poetry available all the time.
And
And so I'm just
needed,
trying
right?
to,
And needed. It's
and need
needed.
it.
Absolutely.
I do believe that,
Yep.
with all of my being. And so I am just trying to, in my little corner of the world, do my part,
Yeah.
because I feel like I've been given uh, those skills. And
Yeah.
again, there's all kinds of ways spiritually to look at that, but I accept what I've been given,
Yep. Yep. I
and
think
I'm
that's
I'm
awesome. And you are
protective of it.
honoring that, which is huge. I think that's amazing. Now, you brought up something that I want to go back to because I really want to get your perspective on it because you set this goal of putting out a piece once a week and you've been doing this for years. It is a craft that you love. There's joy in it, but you also know, there's also discipline to that to keep that coming. Have you ever had a season where you fell out of love with it? Or it kind of started to become mechanical? And if so, how'd you get the love back?
Sometimes I have bitten off more than I can chew sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's April is National Poetry Month,
Okay.
and so every April, a lot of people online do something called 30/30, which is to write a brand new poem every day for 30 days of National Poetry Month, and I did that for 5 years in a row, and then I took some years off of that particular thing, and then I did it again a couple years ago. But there was one season where I had given myself a particular rubric for how to do it. So instead of just writing poems spontaneously for 30 days, I decided that I would have a conversation with somebody on my social media connections, and then whatever poem that I was going to write was going to be based on that conversation.
Wow.
So so I did that for 30 days, and like a week into it, I'm like, dude, what have you done?
What did I do to myself? Yeah.
Yeah, these poems are not self-generated anymore. Now it's about this conversation. It's not even about just leaving yourself open to the headlines of it.
Right.
This is a very specific person with a very specific conversation, and I have no
Wow.
idea what they're going to talk about.
Yeah.
It's not as if the poem is a transcript of that
No,
conversation.
it was a
It's just meant
reflection
to
and
be the spark,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Uh, and so like a week into it, I'm like, oh my God, this is hard. And so, but that's where you get new musculature from,
Yep. Yep.
the heart
Exactly.
of it.
Yep.
And I got through that 30 days, and I wrote 30 different poems based on 30 different
Wow.
conversations. I
Wow.
haven't done it again since.
Yeah. Thank you, but no.
Yeah, but I do think it made me a better writer.
Yeah.
And as much as I am the grown up version of this really shy, bookish child who learned to listen more than talk.
Yeah.
I still love listening to people more than I love talking about myself. And
Mm.
so it was a reminder of how much I do love that,
Yeah.
and the value of that, and
Yeah.
how important that remains to me. And so I'm 100% glad I did it. And so to your larger point, giving myself challenges to stay engaged is part of it. But sometimes, yes, it's not that I fell out of love with it. I just jumped into the deep end, not quite knowing that I
Yeah.
could swim, you
Yeah.
know. But
And then
but
kind
I
of, it
but
sounds like you trusted the process to say, well, I committed to this. I'm going to do it. It's going to be hard. But on the other side of it, it's almost like a good session at the gym. It's like that hurt, but now I'm glad I did it. Right. Like
yeah,
that's incredible.
yeah, yeah. There are a lot of poets every year who start 30/30 and don't finish.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, nope, I'm definitely going to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it's going to go. And the one year I wasn't going to do it at all. And a buddy of mine, a poet named Shaka Campbell, who I love and adore as a poet and as a friend, he said, "I'll do it if you do it." I'm like, oh,
Oh, no, 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 no.
don't
Yeah.
don't put that on me.
I
But
love
because
it.
he's such a glorious poet, I wanted to see 30 days of Shaka's poetry. And
Wow.
so I'm like, oh, okay, dude, I, I'm in.
I'm
And
taking one for the
so,
team. Yeah.
yeah,
That
so
is awesome.
so I did it again.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. I wish we could go for 4 hours because I'm enjoying this immensely, but we're going to keep this shorter because I want people to really be able to listen to this. But I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to do a little commercial break and then we'll come back to the question. So I always love, especially for somebody like you that is truly living out a dream, think, do life. You know, dreaming bigger, thinking better, and doing more of what you were put on the planet to do. And you've given yourself permission to do that. And you've pursued that with a lot of intentionality. But for that person that's listening to this episode, whether it's the first time they've listened to it or they've listened to a bunch of episodes, I always love to just have you speak to that person because I'm guessing there's someone right now that's maybe sitting in the job in Pennsylvania going, but I've got this itch. I've got this thing that I want to do, or it's a big dream, or it feels too big, but they know they got to do it. What's one last piece of advice that you would say to that person? Just to shove them on their way or encourage them on their way. And I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, guys, today we have been talking with Dr. Donny Jackson. You love this guy? I love this guy. Kidding me? Producer, showrunner, director. He's currently working on season 2 of Apple TV's series simply called Dear. Again, it is an absolutely beautiful show. You got to check it out. If you haven't checked it out, just Google it. You will be hooked. I guarantee it. Plus his newest poetry collection called Boy, recently published, is on Amazon. You can also go to his site, DonnyJacksonPoetry.com. That's where I bought my copy. You can grab it where books are sold, but go grab it there, and you can also get a signed copy as well. We'll have all the information in the show notes as well. But definitely track him down. You will be glad that you did. All right, did I give you enough time? What's that one last piece of advice that you'd share with that person that's thinking about going after something big, but maybe is a little scared to do so?
There are people, Mitch, believe it or not, that don't realize how scared they are of succeeding,
Mm,
of actually meeting that dream. And sometimes you don't know until you know. But
yeah.
what I tell people who are trying to be successful in TV or whatever, what I tell them is, and nobody else has to know this, I tell them. So in those quiet midnights of your week, tell yourself, what problem will you create for yourself when you can do whatever you want, when there's nothing but yes in front of you, when you're successful, you know, and you don't have anybody telling you no? What is going to be your problem? Are you going to then drink too much or gamble too much or spend too much or start, talking terribly to servers at restaurants?
Right.
Are you going to show up late? Are you going to start, you know uh, neglecting your friends and family? And you know what it is already. Don't kid yourself. You do know what it is already because you've tripped over it before. So this is the thing to get in touch with now, because when you're successful and people want your attention and they want to be around you and they don't want to tell you no, it's going to be harder to check yourself.
Yeah.
And the road is littered with people who didn't get in touch with that thing,
Yep.
and that was the thing that derailed them, because all of a sudden people don't want to work with them because they're jerks,
Right.
or because they don't show up on time, or because they expect the world and somebody to take out all the green M&Ms from the bowl in the green room. You know what that is already, but tell yourself what it is. Say it out loud. Nobody
Yeah.
else has to know. But if you don't know, it's not going to go away. That thing's not going to go away. It's going to be lurking,
Right.
waiting for all this permission, to borrow your word from earlier. Because at some point you will be successful.
Yeah.
Why not think you won't? And if you are successful, what kind of jerk are you trying to avoid being? Let's
Right.
let's let's avoid that now. Let's get in touch with it now, and just be honest with yourself. Just be
That's
honest with
amazing.
yourself.
Yeah.
Do that part now before it's too late. Because
Yep.
once you're in the Maserati, once you're at the Velvet Rope, once you're at all of the parties, and once you have all the champagne you can have, that level of intoxication with
Yep.
success, it's harder to get your bearings,
Yep.
you know. But if you know that, you know what, I need to take a Uber home from this life for a second
Yep.
before I go too far.
Yeah.
It's good to know that now, and just spend some time with yourself quietly, and admit it. Admit what the thing is.
Yeah.
And once you do that, it's easier. It's easier to guard yourself against it once you've identified it.
Yep.
You just
Exactly.
say, I see you,
That's
little
right. I see you
little
rumbling. I
demon.
see you sneaking up. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think that is so
I'm gonna
powerful because
keep
you're exactly
listening.
right. So many people self-sabotage or they don't really let themselves go full out because they're worried about that thing creeping up and taking
Yeah,
them out, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
you're exactly right. If you know, it's like, oh, sure, that is a risk, but I'm going to acknowledge that risk and I'm going to do things now to prepare for it. That's actually going to allow that inner voice, your deep down thinking, as we call it, to really be able to focus on actually not being afraid of success, but to be able to say, all right,
yeah,
I think I'm ready for it. So
yeah. It's liberating. I'm
yeah,
telling you.
I love that. That is liberation. That is beautiful. Well, Dr. Donny Jackson, my man, I love you. This is great. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to having you back on because I know we got another 10 hours of stuff we could have covered, but I'm so, so grateful for you. And thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and your heart.
Mitch, thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation. It's gone by like,
Right.
5 minutes,
That's exactly
Uh,
right. It's like, oh gosh, I lost track of time again. But how
yeah,
how awesome is that? I love having conversations that flow like that. So thanks so much, brother. I appreciate you.
you are welcome, and I'll come back anytime.